Rappler, the last presidential debates. Joining us today, you're going to hear from a political scientist and a sociologist, an eagle and an archer. On my left is LaSalle political scientist, Professor Richard Haydarian. And on my right, a familiar face to Rapplers, Ateneo sociologist. He's the head of the Development Studies Program and an officer of the Philippine Sociological Society, Professor Jail Cornelio. Welcome, gentlemen.
Well, thank you, Marisa, for having us.
I'm actually really excited about this last debate. Can you lay out for me? Let me go to Richard first. Where are we right now in the elections, and what do you expect from these debates?
Right. I think arguably this is the last and best chance for the laggards to slay the dragon. And without a question, the dragon right now is Duterte. Latest survey says is at 34%, 12 points ahead of polls at second there. He seems to have solidified his support base in Mindanao. 6 out of 10 voters in Mindanao are going for Duterte, and I believe that that's an inelastic vote. It's not going to move significantly. He has also solidified his support among the ABC classes. He's almost 5 out of every 10, ABC members of the demographic are also going to vote for Duterte, and I think that's also a very solid vote. He's still a little bit weak in balanced Luzon. I think it's like 3rd or 4th in balanced Luzon, and in Visayas he has managed to also chip away at the dominance of Mar, but Poe is also climbing there. So the Visayas picture is looking more competitive at the expense of Mar, but definitely without question Duterte is the one who has the momentum. And remember, the latest survey covers already the rape joke, but we have to see whether the next survey takes into consideration the succeeding crisis, especially the diplomatic spats between him, Australia, and other countries, where that could dent his momentum. And let's also keep in mind that it was only the April 15 onwards that Poe went more on the offensive. Trying to use this feminist card, saying we cannot have a dangerous president who jokes around, violence against women, among others. So maybe we still need to see the next survey to see whether Duterte can maintain this momentum. But definitely, if we had an election today, I mean, Duterte, without a question, will be the runaway winner.
Political scientist makes the call for Duterte if we had the elections today. Let me go to the sociologist. Tell us what's happened, what's the context for these debates, and why are they important?
Well, it's a 12-point lead for Duterte, isn't it? So, a slight disagreement with Richard here. I feel that Duterte is just going to enjoy the ride, to be honest. I don't think he's going to, there's no need for him to slay anyone as a dragon, because I never saw him as someone who really explained his policies very clearly to begin with. So I don't expect him to have any motivation to do that all the more this time around. I think the onus is not on him, but on the others who want to catch up, who want to explain themselves a little bit clearer, and perhaps try to show that they are, of course, clearly a better options. And I think the challenge is much bigger, to a certain extent, on Mar Rojas, yes, but certainly on Grace Poe.
What does the fact that Duterte is so far ahead right now show about Philippine society?
Yes, thank you for that question. I think some people think that it's a protest vote, right, against the Aquino administration. One of the things that I noticed amongst people who support Duterte is that they are in love with his authenticity, right? That he says what he thinks.
You're waiting to hear what he says.
Exactly. And in a way, it's already predictable, right? It's going to say something that would offend people, right? But that's exactly the appeal that our friend Duterte has to these people. And in many ways, that is a beautiful, or I suppose poignant contrast to Aquino's the perception that Aquino has a lack of empathy, and which is also transferred to Mar Rojas, being an elite. And Duterte presents himself as someone from the grassroots. And I think we have to see it like that, someone who defends and upholds the interests of the grassroots.
Yeah, the term I use for that in my recent columns and interviews is grievance politics. I think this is the zeitgeist around the world. If you go to Peru, you have Keiko Fujimori daughter of the former dictator is actually incarcerated right now, polling at around 40%. You know, way ahead. I think 20 points ahead of the guy who was second, and their second guy is actually kind of like Mar Rojas, kind of technocrat guy, but no appeal. Then, of course, you go to countries like India. The Congress Party was booted out in 2014, and Narendra Modi, a Hindu nationalist, has come to power. And we have seen also a tremendous amount of reduction in terms of their press freedom. In Japan, you had Shinzo Abe coming back in 2013, and their press freedom went from what, top 15 to now barely in the top 60. And then, of course, in Indonesia, I was very surprised. I was there in Indonesia in 2014, and there was so much excitement on Joko Widodo, and he almost lost to Prabowo Subianto, if not for the ABC and the youth coming out in the last week, launching these huge concerts and really presenting him as a kind of change. And he barely survived, and it was a contentious elections there. So even a person like Jokowi almost lost to Prabowo Subianto, who was essentially a holdover of Suharto regime, and he has been accused of massive human rights violations while he was in the special forces in the military, and he was promising this Suharto discipline kind of mantra, and it was really appealing to a lot of people. So when you look at the bigger picture around the world, not to mention Trump in the case of the United States, it perfectly makes sense that in other countries, in other semi-functional or dysfunctional democracies like the Philippines, you may also see this grievance politics. Now, the theoretical framework of that was forwarded by our good friend Samuel Huntington in 1960s. You know, not his Clash of Civilization, not that one, but I'm talking about like political order in changing societies. He essentially argued that a lot of post-colonial developing countries are more vulnerable to instability when they're growing very fast. Because when you have rapid economic growth, hand in hand with that, you have rapid increase in inequality and explosion in expectation. And at some point, the government and the system cannot accommodate that. Which brings me back to this excellent point Jail pointed a while ago, which is this kind of anti-establishment sentiment coming out against Aquino administration. I think the Aquino administration, without a question, has brought about a lot of good improvements in the country, both institutional, macroeconomic, otherwise. But his moral politic kind of strategy polarizes society, and at the same time create this huge expectation that we can get rid of corruption, that we're going to have good governance and effective governance. But we didn't see much of that, right? I mean, if you look at the good governance initiatives, they were lopsided. There's a sentiment that this is perception, politics is a game of perception. There's a perception that he was strong on corruption when it is from the opposition, but when it comes to his inner circle, he's very protective. So I think that was a big issue. And number two, a lot of people who were accused of corruption, one of them is out on bail and relay, and is now, perfectly functioning as a senator, and again, the head of the opposition. So the point is that even the opposition people who were accused of corruption are not facing the kind of justice that people were saying to come out. Not to mention, in the last 6 months, I think Aquino really hurt himself with this. The traffic jam, we have the worst traffic in the world already. The APEC summit did not help. The Laglag Bala. When you put all of these things together, it explains why you have grievance politics, particularly in NCR and among the Metro Manila people. Now, Aquino's numbers are collapsing in NCR. His net satisfaction rating is at 0. So, and this is where exactly you see not only Duterte, but also Marcos making a huge headway. I mean, the fascinating thing about this election is that both the number 1 and number 2 candidates are strongman candidates who are promising this kind of, they're presenting themselves as the Messiah who will solve all these problems. And all you have to do is obey us and follow us. And both of them are very strong among NCR and very strong among ABC, which again is very similar to what happened in Chile in the time of Salvador Allende, in Turkey during the Cold War, and Thailand in more recent years. So history also shows that the middle class, when they're small, they're sandwiched between an oligarchic elite and the masses, actually tend to side with autocratic leaders or the military. So I think this is the broader zeitgeist that we have to keep in mind. So when I analyze it that way, I'm convincing myself why things make sense. Because to be honest, on the surface, nothing makes sense. For the first time in decades, the Philippines finally is no longer the sick man of Asia. Economy is doing well. We have institutional reforms here and there. And people say, why are we voting, for outside-the-box candidates? But when you go to nuances, when you try to understand the sentiment of people who are voting for Duterte, then you know where we are coming from. But last thing I want to say, I'm sorry, I'm sure Jay will add a lot of this too, is that, remember, Duterte is still just getting 1/3 of the votes here, right? I mean, So if he's going to win, he's winning because this is a first past the post single round. You know, I think he could have more difficulties if this goes to a runoff election, and we don't have that.
Which
so let's not also exaggerate that
his popularity. Right?
Let's not exaggerate his popularity and the resonance of the strongman message. I think we are not yet at the point whereby the majority of Filipinos want to get rid of democratic institutions. But definitely, the strongman rhetoric is gaining ground. And depending on how the rivals perform, which excellently Jail pointed out, the onus right now is in the opposition because the dragon to slay is now Duterte and Marcos.
That's true.
And let's see how effectively they do that.
So I'm going to jump off of what you said. You've taken it and gone back over maybe a decade, right?
Yeah.
Going back to India and Modi. But I think there's a principal game changer here, which is the role of technology. And I'd love to hear, Jail, you know, what do you think? What role, given this context, what role is technology playing? Certainly, we've talked a bit about the angry people online, right? But what role is technology playing, and is it empowering Duterte?
Sure, very good. There are two ways to answer that. One is, and I will draw from our research. I'm part of a big study, Vote of the Poor, at the Ateneo. And we partnered with SWS on a massive survey of the qualities that people want and the reliable sources of information. And I think I mentioned that 2 weeks ago here also, that for people, generally, the most reliable source of information is not the internet. It's really television news, radio news, and television interviews. So as much as we are concerned that there are so many trolls, right, taking over the internet, it appears that they're not necessarily, or at least the internet is not necessarily seen as a reliable source of information, right? People are aware that there are trolls, for example, right? However, having said that, they shape opinion. Trolls do shape opinion, and they are broadcast on primetime news, and we talk about them as well. I think I also mentioned that 2 weeks ago that the main role of the internet is really or social media for that matter, is to clarify people's positions, right? Trolls have a big role to play, not in terms of annoying us, but I suppose, in the democratic sphere, in making us understand our position a little bit better. Saboteurs are necessary in this case to convince us that the person we are supporting is worth supporting.
And your reaction, Richard?
Well, actually, I wrote a book on the Arab Spring 2 years ago, and I remember in 2011-12 there was so much excitement about the so-called Facebook revolution, Twitter revolution, but I was always skeptical. You know, people like Morozov, for instance, they wrote this book, Net Delusion, and if you look at it, they make a very good argument. The countries that actually have the highest rate of internet penetration and Twitter usage, like Saudi Arabia, for instance, did not experience this kind of revolution. So I said, maybe we have to look at it, whether this Facebook and Twitter is really the source of social change that we thought about. And of course, we saw that over time, what happened in the Arab countries was that initially, in the less adept autocratic regimes like Egypt and Tunisia, the civil society and middle class were able to use the Facebook as a new space for self-mobilization, and eventually they were able to get rid of Mubarak and Ben Ali and all. But later on, not only in the more developed countries like Emirates or Saudi Arabia, but even in Egypt and Tunisia, the Anshan regime and the conservative forces now realize that they actually could also use the Facebook and Twitter to get back.
Correct.
So what you saw was a Twitter devolution. So for instance, members of the intelligence apparatus would infiltrate the Facebook of people and get to know exactly where they're going to have the next protest. Or they would infiltrate their Facebook and create disinformation, right? And then later on, in countries like Syria, we saw a situation whereby the Twitter and Facebook was actually a source of polarization, whereby people of these different ethnic backgrounds were using the Twitter and Facebook to actually create their own echo chamber and reinforce their own biases in a zero-sum manner versus the other sides. And I think this was also clear in the case of Ukraine in 2014. If I go to the Russian-speaking Twitter, it all shows how Ukraine is a terrible place. You know, Russia had to save its little sister. If I go to the Ukrainian-speaking Twitter and Facebook, it tells me how Russia is this big bear imperialist who's trying to take it. So the Twitter and Facebook is no longer this common place where people come and have horizontal give-and-take conversation. It has become fragmented, whereby every group and faction has created its own kind of echo chambers and reinforcing their own biases and prejudices. to a point that you're having actually devolution, more fragmentation also within the society, not only in the sphere. So with that in mind, I was wondering, what about the Philippines, right? So remember in 2013, when you had this million people, march?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Sure.
Yeah.
I remember that, and it was very fascinating because there was no leadership. It was very
I'll just
horizontal.
do context for that is it took one Facebook post, 1 week to get about 100,000 Filipinos protesting against corruption in Luneta Park. So go ahead, Richard.
And we had that, right? So we went there and we had these concerts, everything like that.
And it helped trigger the declaration that the PDAF is unconstitutional.
That's
correct?
right.
Yeah,
That's
go.
right.
Right. And of course, remember 2013, I think, was a crucial year to assess whether this, social network could be politically consequential. To a certain degree, on the anti-corruption issue, I think it pushed the Aquino administration to revisit its view of pork barrel. Remember, initially Aquino was saying, and I'm not sure we have to get rid of the pork barrel. That was his leash on the Congress after all. But later on, he had to withdraw because he saw the public pressure. But I was a little bit maybe skeptical. Maybe Jael could correct me on that. I felt there was no follow-through. It was just an explosion of spontaneous criticism. And then the next day, everyone goes back, and we're going back to our Facebook and essentially online activists. No one is doing the difficult groundwork, And then the other thing was the senatorial race in 2013. Remember how large was the backlash against Nancy Binay, right? There was a huge all these memes coming out, among other things, and yet she made it to the Senate and top 5, if I'm not mistaken, right? She did very well. So that made me a little bit skeptical about whether the social media is as consequential as I thought, or others thought could be in the case of the Philippines, which is somehow a Facebook, Twitter, capital, one of the capitals of the world. But what we're seeing in the last 2 years is that it's not only the reformist people, it's also the conservative revisionist people who have also seen the value of the social network. So I'm beginning to see what happened in the Arab Spring, whereby in the first year it was the progressives, middle-class people who were using the social network to get back at Aung San regime and conservative forces, and then later on the Aung San regime came back and used it more effectively against them. Maybe we're seeing the same thing, because if you look at
I'm going to rebut you on this.
Yeah.
Only because we've also been watching it, right? What we're seeing, and we're actually we've been doing 3 different types of surveys online since December, every month. And since December, Duterte has actually been ahead on all 3. We do one on Rappler online. We do another one on SMS, which actually breaks it down in representative sampling. And then the last one is on Facebook itself. So Facebook is the least reliable of that, right? But what we've seen is that this activity on social media impacts zeitgeist, and zeitgeist has showed up at the statistical surveys the end of February, right? So from December to February. So are we as fragmented as before? What we can see is which of the candidates are actually using social media well. And that means both community engagement, real people, as well as bots. We certainly have seen the candidates, the 2 candidates who have used bots the most, right? And we've done stories on this, Mar Rojas, and to a degree, Duterte, right? So the 2 candidates who have, Duterte has used it and has used that to spur both engagement and, to a degree, the anger that his supporters have shown online. So how did you guys look at the impact of the rape statements that he's had? I mean, it didn't show up in the statistical survey, as you pointed out. What did you think of it?
Did the survey happen before the
it
rape,
covers
or
the
did
initial fallout.
The first part, but not
first part,
the full
not
thing,
the latter part.
So I'm
then we have yet to
curious.
see the full impact of that statement, and of course his many other statements after that, right? To be honest, to a certain extent, I agree with Richard's point that
good and complex, very nice.
Yeah, right, because the people who support Duterte are already convinced, that he is
The savior.
That's true. In many ways, it is also an emotional vote, right?
Very emotional.
Yeah. I'm not saying that it is illogical. I mean, emotions are also rational in a very different sense. People have their own reasons why they're supporting Duterte. I mean, Mindanaoans, for example, think that it's time for them to be represented in the national government, and there has been no other time for them to do this and to seize the opportunity.
But as you can also, as you pointed out, AB is voting for Duterte, so that is not just an emotional reaction, right?
on the premise that the ABC
Is not
are,
emotional.
the people
Well,
like us are
let's-
not emotional,
yeah,
right?
yeah. No,
Well,
we're
I am very
emotional.
emotional.
Yeah,
In fact,
yeah,
I'm very
yeah.
depressive.
Right.
But I must say that I think the interests are very different, right? You've got Mindanaoans who would like to be represented in the national
Right.
government, and I think it's a valid it's a valid emotional vote in that
Right.
sense. For the ABC, my understanding, my view is that it has to do with protecting the interests, right? Music to their ears, right? When Duterte talks about disciplining society, right?
Yeah.
Making sure that people who need to go to jail will go to jail. But I think that in many ways, and this is how it actually is very classist also, when Duterte talks about jailing people or punishing criminals, I cannot really, I suppose, well, when we talk about criminals, there is the class dimension to it,
Yeah.
right? Of course, we would like to jail
Petty
corrupt,
criminals,
you know?
petty
No,
criminals,
right,
yeah,
right,
yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Petty criminals,
exactly,
yeah, yeah.
exactly. And it's much easier to jail them and to punish them than it is, for example, people who are already in positions of power, right? So what exactly does Duterte mean, you know, when he wants to eradicate crime in the next 3 to 6 months? I cannot really remove myself from the fact that it has a class dimension to it.
Right.
So it is more complex, in other words, than meets the eye, right? So in what we see, and to echo what you just said, the fragmentation is along the lines not just of class or geography, but really different interests that they're hoping that a person like Duterte could
Right.
beat.
Oh, interesting. Of course, Duterte is taking the lion's share of the share of voice
far?
on Twitter
Yeah.
right now before we go in, right? So he has 50%,
Can I-
48%.
Yeah,
of
can I
votes.
It's a
jump in on
battalion,
that?
yeah.
I think, you see, I think one thing we have to keep in mind is the power of memes in these elections. To be very honest, I think the success of this historically revisionist, narrative being developed that, Marcos perhaps was not as bad as we thought.
Yeah.
Maybe he was Park Chung-hee. Maybe he was, of course, for anyone who has a knowledge of Park Chung-hee or Lee
Yeah.
Kuan Yew, they would say absolutely Marcos was never close. I always cite Lee Kuan Yew to Marcos supporters. Did you know that Lee Kuan Yew hated Marcos
Of
because
course.
Marcos
He
gave
did.
a bad name to autocrats
Right.
because he was such an economic disaster
That's
for
true.
the Philippines,
That's true.
Among other things.
And he told Filipinos this when he
Yes,
came here in
he wrote that.
1991.
Yeah,
right?
he wrote that. I mean, in his books, he always mentioned how Marcos were completely unreliable people for them, and he completely disliked them. He said something like, "Only a country like in the Philippines would they allow someone who ravaged their national treasury to be considered as a national hero." But you see these memes which are very powerful.
Sure.
You don't need to
Sure.
go through this difficult academic literature, these statistical numbers.
Yes,
All you see is
exactly.
Marcos, Park Chung-hee, Lee Kuan Yew.
That's true.
Oh, by the way, Park Chung-hee's daughter is now president of Korea.
Right.
Oh, by the way, Lee Kuan Yew's son is right now
That's right.
the Singaporean Prime Minister, and they're doing relatively well. So maybe we have to bring back the son. So you see a lot of subliminal and also explicit message on the part of Bongbong. Like Bongbong says, like, my father was not really bad. If only there was no EDSA, maybe we would have been in Singapore. So I think the memes were very powerful in these elections, and that's something that we have to keep in mind. On the issue of the rape thing,
Yeah.
I think the survey does not fully cover the fallout, only perhaps initial stages. We know that it actually got worse over time. But I think if there's one person who's in a good position to take advantage of this rape joke, fallout is Poe. Surveys suggest
Grace
that
Poe,
Poe
yeah.
is by far the number one in the second preferred candidate.
Yes.
And her number actually
Yes.
increased compared to last time. Last time I think she was 29. She's now beyond 30%. So it means that, if there's someone there who can make people think twice about Duterte and make them shift their minds, she'll be the number one beneficiary of that. That is the sense I have. So, and remember, the strategy of Poe here is to play the feminist card against Duterte on the violence against women issue. But the other one is to say that, and I think she also, to say that maybe Duterte is a tough guy as a mayor, maybe as my DILG or crime czar, but he's not a steady hand. He's not a sound mind. He should not be literally head of the state, So I think this is where Poe could come in, and she has already started this argument that he's a dangerous president. Maybe he's a great mayor,
Interesting. Yeah.
maybe he's a good anti-crime czar, but head of state is a whole different ballgame.
Do you think that strategy will work?
Yeah.
we have to see the surveys.
Yeah.
My expectation
Yeah.
is that it could shift some of the soft supporters of Duterte. Clearly, we could say easily half of Duterte supporters are hardcore supporters.
Sure.
They will go with him to the end of the world.
Yeah,
I mean, no question about it. He has the most
sure.
dedicated supported among all candidates. But I think you could say easily half of that. Other half, especially the women, you know,
Yes.
could be more susceptible to shift their preference to Poe.
Fascinating.
Especially if Poe plays the woman feminist card properly and says that maybe I am the steady hand and sound mind that you want at the head of state. And by the way, I can put Duterte actually in position of anti-crime czar. Isn't that
And
the
she
issue
did,
you have?
yeah.
So
And she did.
I think if she's a little bit more systematic about this messaging and given more time, which is what we don't have right now, and if she uses this strategy in the debate, I think she could regain the momentum.
Well, so right now watching us are both Nicole Curato
Yes,
and
that's
Clarissa
right.
David.
Yes,
Nicole
yes,
is
right,
in
yes,
Italy for a conference, but hi Nicole. And
right.
Clarissa David just said she agreed with Jail that the Duterte support from ABC voters is support for anti-poor peace and order solutions. I'm
thank
going
you,
to take the
Claire.
mic and let's go to the reporters, Rappler's
Right.
reporters who have been covering and sticking close to the candidates for the last event.
I'm
Let
actually
me
chatting with
take a
Nicole.
mic and bring you. Who will I go to first? Why don't we go with the least in terms of statistical surveys, and let's end with the front runner. So let's go to Patty Pachon, who's been covering Miriam Santiago. Go ahead and sit. I'll come to you. So go ahead. What do we expect from Miriam today, and what's the campaign been like getting to this?
Well, the campaign has been very veiled for Senator Santiago because, as we all know, although she doesn't directly tell us, she has been suffering from health issues and she had to skip the Cebu leg of the debate to participate in a drug trial of a new anti-cancer pill.
Okay.
So recently, Senator Santiago has been back on the campaign trail. She has agreed to be in a in several speaking engagements with her running mate Bongbong Marcos.
Yeah.
I think she had 3 or 4 consecutive speeches in universities, and that's something new in her campaign because she doesn't usually go out that much in her campaign. And now she's visibly stronger than ever. She's livelier. She's able to enunciate her words well because there were times that she would stutter or stop in her speeches. But now she's visibly better.
So you're saying physically she seems better now.
She seems better now. And her media relations officer noted that Senator Santiago has also been reviewing about the topics, and given that one of the topics is foreign policy, we know that it's her expertise. Maybe she can shine in this debate too.
Fantastic. All right, let me go to Grace Poe. That is Camille. You guys can. So, why don't we switch? Camille, Grace Poe. What's changed since the last time we saw her in the debate?
Well, there has been changes in terms of her messaging because right after when Duterte became the front runner, she immediately changed the focus of her messages from poverty, from
interesting. That's what
from education. It became peace and order, but that didn't last that long because after 5 days or so, she returned to the message of poverty again. So there's still no coherence in terms of messaging. But if there's one thing that we're going to look forward to is now Senator Serge Osmeña is helping her again, the same person who helped her during the 2013 senatorial elections. And if you will notice, all her ads now on television, like there's this about ending contractual labor, and the other one is about the respect for women. It's very specific compared to her previous television advertisement.
Right.
So let's see if her numbers will improve after that. As for the debate, she didn't have any sortie yesterday, Saturday, and also last Friday. So it's a prep because she's preparing for this.
You've seen her go through a roller coaster, headed after the Supreme Court decision. You said she had renewed energy going in. I guess, how would you describe her today walking into this debate?
I think looking at the pictures, she's a bit serious. So maybe because of the decline in her numbers. And I'm interested to see how the change in strategy for Poe will be like in this debate. Because in the past debates, she was just calm and she didn't attack any. So
Yeah.
she didn't attack any of the candidates. But now, after the Duterte rape joke and their first and second, so I'm
Very
interested
tight.
to see. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks, Camille. And we will go now to our front runner, the woman who's been shadowing Rudy Duterte, Pia Renada. What's it like? What is he like nowadays, and what do you expect from him?
Well, now he's on combat mode because every time he goes on sorties, he's always asked about the remarks he's made recently, the rape remarks, his remarks about Australia and the US. So we've been seeing him more irritable in rallies because journalists keep asking the same questions, asking if he's apologized. So yeah, it's changed a little bit, but he's still in full form during campaign rallies. He's still cracking jokes. He's still explaining his platform of change, of anti-crime. So in front of people, in front of the public, he's still the same Duterte. And you can still see the crowds are still hysterical. They're still insane when he visits provinces. That hasn't really changed that much. People still crowd his rallies. People still attend his rallies. People still flock to the streets when he goes around the towns. So yeah.
The campaign looked quite disorganized in handling the rape statement. I mean, what happened and what lesson learned did you see?
Well, one thing that played against the campaign team was the brains behind the messaging. They aren't very social media savvy. They weren't. In fact, they heard about the incident, the YouTube video, hours after it went up, and people were already talking about it. So they weren't able, number one, to respond quickly to the video. Second, there are many groups under the campaign machinery of Duterte, and sometimes or many times they don't really work in coordination with each other. So faced with this crisis, they did not coordinate. They simply acted on their own. We had one group issuing one press release, then a few days after, another group sending another press release with a contradictory message. So it's obvious that they were not prepared for the backlash. They were not coordinated or cohesive enough to act as one group.
Okay. Do you see any remorse at all in Duterte?
No.
None, right? None.
I mean, he just admits that it's foul language. It's the same message that, accept me for who I am. This is how I speak.
That's right.
But he admits it's rude, but he simply won't say sorry for the remark itself because he said that he already apologized for it years ago, and he was just retelling the remark, and he just wanted to be accurate about it.
Did he understand the impact it had and why it became so controversial?
We asked him, and he knows, he expects his numbers to go down because of the remark. But he still says he won't die if he loses the presidential race. He will simply continue what he's doing, and he won't take back what he said.
Fantastic. Okay, Pia, we're going to come back to you. That's Pia Renada, who's been covering Duterte. I'm going to go back to our analyst, our political scientist and sociologist, to tell me about Binay and Mar, because our reporters who are covering them are actually out in the field covering them. Tell me about, actually, ironically, they're the two forces for the status quo in a strange way, right? They've got the experience. In any other time period, experience is actually a plus.
Yeah.
But this time around, when people seem to want a reaction, tell me, how were the two of them doing coming into this debate?
You want to say something?
You want to start, maybe?
Oh, Binay, maybe. Binay?
Sure, go.
Binay, oh, gosh. If I were to base my expectation on his performance in the previous debates, in as much as I would like to respect him as a candidate, perhaps there's a lot more that he could do or he should do, right? Instead of simply assailing everybody else as people out there to get him. I don't think that rhetoric still works. Maybe it did when Jambi Madrigal and Manny Villar had this fight years ago, but not anymore. Now he has no choice but to really be very transparent. So all these commercials, for example, about him defending the poor, don't seem to gain traction anymore, right?
Yeah.
I mean, looking at the surveys, for example, his supporters used to be in classes D and E, right?
Yes.
But now we know that certainly Duterte and Grace Poe have stolen effectively those supporters from those classes. So it appears that, and my initial impression is that the message doesn't come across in a very genuine manner anymore. So going back to my initial point, I think the key word when we try to understand Duterte's lead and Binay's decline is authenticity. people see the authenticity in Duterte, someone who curses,
Yes.
right? But at the same time, who was there, you know, when disasters happen, and who has a record to back his claims up, so to speak. But Binay, of course, has that record, but we know that Binay's baggage is loaded with many other allegations, from dynasties, you know, to building a huge dynasty, to all these allegations of corruption.
So we have maybe 5 minutes before the
Yeah,
debate's supposed to begin.
I'll
Can
be
you
very
pick up
quick.
Mar, or go ahead.
The first thing I want to say is that if you look at Mar and Binay, they seem to be two guys who think of themselves as actually candidates of change. Like,
Yes.
look at
That's right.
Mar, he says,
That's
I'm
right, yeah.
actually also Dan Matuid, which is a departure from status quo. If you look at Binay, he says, I'm the true populist guy who will
That's right.
really help
That's
the
right.
poor because the
That's
poor
right.
have been neglected. So they are seen as establishment, but they
Yes.
don't see themselves that way.
Yes.
So that explains why they have this kind of schizophrenic messaging outside there. The other thing I would want to say is that I think they really underestimated Duterte, and they
did.
overestimated their machinery. In Philippine politics, machinery is not a secret. In fact, we saw in 1992, in 1998, people who had the machinery were actually the ones who were behind. And remember, the machinery is defection is something normal in Philippine politics, and we're already beginning to see that the Binay machinery is experiencing defections to Poe and Duterte, and the same thing in the Marras machinery. So they overestimated the machinery. They thought of themselves as something that other people didn't seem to see them. On Mar, very quickly, the problem with Mar is that he's offering the same deal without an upgrade. So you cannot sell the same iPhone to people without an upgrade. This is also the other side, guys. We live in a technological age whereby people always want improvement, even if they want the basic concept. So if this is an Apple or iPhone, he's offering exactly the same one. And the point is that you already see the Pinoy's numbers collapsing.
That's
So he's
right.
losing
That's
traction.
right.
So he had to create
That's
a Daan Matuid 2.0, and he's not offering that. One thing that we could offer was to say that, well, I'm going to be the more competent version of the status quo. After all, Aquino was an OJT president. But the problem is that Duterte demolished him on the competency issue thanks to the Yolanda crisis, among other
Correct.
things.
Sure,
Again, this is a game of perception. This is not the judgment I'm
Sure.
making on the people per se, but I think in the game of perception, Mar and Binay have been the laggards.
Sure, may I say something?
Go,
Right,
go.
yeah. Competence is a very interesting, characteristic that one could really rally on, right? However, again, using our survey, right, with SWS and Vote of the Poor, intelligence, experience in governance, platform of governance, these attributes don't matter to voters. What really matter to voters in the end, I mentioned this also two weeks ago, right? Concern for the poor, principio, and integrity, right? Mar Rojas is a technocrat, and hands down, he's very good. He knows what he wants to do and how he wants to accomplish these things. Unfortunately, that doesn't resonate with many people. That's why I said authenticity is a keyword. It's a very important keyword to consider here.
Can I ask you something about
Yeah.
the machinery, right? People say the count is where everything matters, and one of Rodrigo Duterte's weaknesses may be that he may not be able to make sure that the votes are counted in his favor. Is that correct?
Right.
Do you think that the two, Mar and Binay, who would have the strongest machinery,
I
could
see.
they
Right.
actually
Activate
Before
the machinery.
going to, I'll be very quick about
Go.
it. The point is people keep on saying they're against corruption and all, but Binay's 20% number is more or less there all the time. So I see this incongruence between what
Interesting.
people say they want, but the numbers say that actually Binay is 20% among D and 7% among E. So it seems the poor say something in the surveys, but they're voting differently.
Yeah.
So maybe we have to also take this kind of surveys with a grain of salt.
Yep.
Because I think the empirical evidence suggests otherwise. I love you, Jail, but I think I had to say that thing. The other thing I would want to say is on the machinery, right?
Yes.
Yeah, the thing with machinery is it might help you, of course, when it comes to guarding your votes, especially in a situation that we have right now, whereby election process are very much vulnerable to sabotage, among other things.
Yes.
But I don't know. I mean, the thing is that surveys matter. And
Yes.
if in the surveys, the candidates with the biggest machinery are not doing well, their machinery will defect to their second preference and protect them. So I could suspect that a lot of LP people, well, Joy Salceda already did that, and Joy Salceda is a
Yeah, he
benchmark.
did.
For
Yeah,
me.
yeah,
He's
yeah,
the bench. When he defects to a party, you know that this is what is seen as more or less the more winnable candidate.
Exactly.
So it's possible that the LP
2
machinery
weeks.
will defect and protect the PO vote because she's seen as the one who can defeat perhaps Duterte. And LP is against Duterte the way it seems. Yeah.
Okay, it looks like the debate is starting. We're going to be
Is it starting?
watching. Stay
Good.
tuned on this stream, and we're
Correct.
giving you the last presidential
Correct.
debate by ABS-CBN.
Good. Good.